Hey, I think we got all the spinning wheels and everything else going on here. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Doug Thompson Podcast live. Today, I am joined by this person. This guest here has had just about every job on the planet. I think when I look at his his resume, Terry Tucker. Terry, how you doing?
I'm great, Doug. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for being motivational. Thanks for coming on. So I not to shortchange, but can you give us the nickel tour of who you are, what you're about? I know that's very much shortchanging because you're at least 50 cents.
Yeah, well, I give change, so that's not a problem. Yeah, sure. Born and raised in Chicago, oldest of three boys. Can't tell this from looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall and played college basketball at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. I've got a brother who's 6'7", who was a pitcher for the University of Notre Dame, and then another brother who's 6'6", who was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. And then my dad was 6'5", so I kind of joked that if you sat behind our family in church growing up, there wasn't a prayer's chance you were going to see anything that was going on whatsoever.
How tall was your mother?
5'8", and my 5'8" mother was the boss. It didn't matter how big or tall we were. Whatever mom said, that's the way it went. So
isn't that true in life?
It is. It really is. But I think she kind of felt safe with all of us around. It was like everything's good with mom. Graduated from the Citadel, moved home to find a job, and I'm really going to date myself now. This was long before the internet was available to find a job. Found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, but the downside of that is I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mom care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. I won't go into a lot about my professional background, but I've had quite a few different jobs, and some in business. And then when I was 37 years old, made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer and worked undercover narcotics. I was a SWAT team hostage negotiator, became a girls' high school basketball coach when our daughter was in high school. She fortunately or unfortunately got my height. And then finally, my wife and I have been married for 28 years. We have this one child, a daughter, graduated the United States Air Force Academy, and is a lieutenant in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Wow, that's really cool. And thank her when thank her for her service. And the Space Force is really pretty cool. So I have to go back. Like a couple of things. One of them, who came up with the name of Frosty at Wendy's? That's like the best thing there.
I don't know who came up with the name, but the funny thing about the Wendy's title is Dave Thomas, the founder of the organization, named it after his daughter, and her name was Melinda Lou, but nobody could pronounce that, so they just called her Wendy, and that's how Wendy's, the title Wendy's, came about.
I knew it was named after her daughter, but I didn't know it was Melinda Lou. And
Melinda
nobody.
Lou. Yeah.
That's Dave. He's a wonderful human being. He was just an example of sticking to it and going through that. So Dave was a wonderful individual.
He was.
Did you get to meet him? I take it.
Many times. Yeah. I mean, he was a guy who was adopted, and I mean, really a lot of his income, a lot of his money went to adoption organizations. And there's a foundation now that he set up. He's passed on in that, but that, strictly deals with adoption.
Well, and he's a great example of writing your own story. Because there's a lot of people out there that think, well, I'm adopted or something, and they let life write their story as opposed to them taking it by the handles. And you're perfectly capable of writing your own story, and I think he's a perfect example of that.
He is.
So the next thing I have is how do you blend in as an undercover narcotics thing at 6'7" or 8? Or
well, that's a great question, and I'll be honest with you. In that industry, and that drug selling is an industry. Yeah. The thing that motivates it is greed. And as long as you have money, you'll find somebody to sell you drugs. And I mean, part of it, you have to do a little bit of acting. I remember one time I was working the night shift, and one of the day shift people called me and said, look, we got these kids coming down from Dayton, Ohio. This was in Cincinnati. And they want to sell you mushrooms. Will you buy from them? And I'm like, yeah, sure. I'll buy from them. And so we developed a cover, and I was a professor of metallurgy at the University of Cincinnati. I'm like, the only thing I know about metal is that rusts when you put it out in the water, outside in the rain and stuff. So I met these kids in a park, and we did the here's your $200, give me the mushrooms. And then instead of partying in Cincinnati, they partied in the Hamilton County Justice Center for the night. So,
well, I can tell you, they probably weren't rocket scientists and knew less about metallurgy than you did.
That's probably true.
A great cover for that standpoint. So, I mean, you've taken in a lot of these, now you're motivational speaker, motivational check. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, motivational check was something that was a phrase that our defensive tactics instructor in the police academy put in place that anybody could just yell out. We did some pretty interesting things when we were learning to be cops, including running a marathon and all kinds of things like that. And, he wanted this phrase in place so that if you thought you were at the end of your rope, you were having a tough day, you couldn't get through it and stuff like that, you could just yell out motivational check. And the rest of the class, we were the 84th recruit class, would yell out 84, basically saying, hey, we're all in this together. You're not alone. We'll get through it together, but don't quit. And so when I was looking for, a name for my blog, people keep saying, you should start a blog. And I'm like, I can barely turn my cell phone on in the morning. What do you mean start a blog? And so motivational check just seemed to kind of keep coming to the forefront of my mind. And that's how I got the name and where it came from. And I've been using it since 2019 now, and it just seems to work.
No, I think I love the concept because I'm a very positive individual for the most part, but occasionally I need those as well, and it's that somebody's got your back, that feeling. None of us like to be the Lone Ranger. Well, there's a few people that do, but most of us like to know somewhere out there we've got some support of some sort. And I like that. Hey, if this is like a motivational check, I like that. And I like what you're doing. I mean, you covered so many different topics in your story. It is very interesting as well, because if you took the hero's journey, you've got a bunch of disconnected dots that if you look at the surface, because when I'm looking at your resume and all that, I'm like, okay, I'm having a hard time connecting some of these dots. Now, in hindsight, I'm sure you've got that. So sort of tell us what brought about these things. I mean, there's things in life that I know that sometimes send us in an unanticipated direction, or a direction that seems very different than what we've had in the past. I was talking to somebody, one of my coworkers on the other podcast I do for the company, and she was a technical writer and became a product manager. And I'm like, and I'm like, wow, okay, but it makes sense once she explained it. So help me connect some dots here as you sort of go through all this.
Sure, I'll be happy to do that, and hopefully this will make a little more sense. Always wanted to be in law enforcement. I felt it was my passion and my purpose. My grandfather was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. So was in Chicago during Prohibition, when alcohol was outlawed in the United States, during the Great Depression in the 20s and 30s, and when the gangs, Al Capone and those guys, were shooting up the town. And he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad always remembered the stories my grandmother told of the knock on the door of Mrs. Sucker, grab your son, your husband's been shot, and come with us. So when I expressed this interest of, I want to go down this path, my dad was like, oh, no. You're going to go to college. You're going to major in business. You're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids, and live in the, my dad had my entire life planned out. Yeah. And when I graduated from college, as I mentioned, my dad was dying of cancer. So I had two choices. Do I blaze my own trail and say, sorry, Dad, I'm going to go be in law enforcement? Or out of love and respect for him and all he and my mom did for us, do I say, well, okay, I'll go into business? And that's exactly what I did. My first job was at Wendy's. My second job was a healthcare administrator. And I kind of joke, I did what every good son did. I waited until my father passed away, and then I followed my dreams. And like I said, I was a 37-year-old rookie police officer, which by all accounts was pretty old at the time. I definitely know I took a whole lot more Tylenol in the police academy than the younger kids did.
Yeah. Well, you bring up an interesting term, and I think we get locked into this. I don't know where this comes from. And you talk about love and respect. You did this and you went, you didn't go into that. I don't think it's mutually exclusive that you can love and respect your father, and it needs to be sort of and do what you want to do, right? And I think too much of us, and I don't know again where my dad died when I was a senior in high school. He died of lung cancer, so I didn't get to have these big theoretical discussions and stuff. I had to grow up a lot, and he instilled great values with me. We had some great discussions. He told me he was going to die. He let me know that several months ahead of time so I could prepare myself. And it made it easier. I came to terms with that, hey, we're all going to assume room temperature at some point in time. That we need to live while we're here. That was his biggest regret is at 40 and early 40s that it got cut short. He never got to see my kids, never got to see my grandkids. But this is all selfish stuff on me. But I'm sure that he would have had that. So in hindsight, and not knowing your dad and all that, would it have been okay to challenge him? I mean, if you had it to do over again, would you challenge him on that?
No.
Okay.
It was he was so dead set against it. I mean, he did everything he could. I mean, we were living in Columbus, Ohio at the time, and I mean, he knew the police chief, he knew the sheriff, he knew. I actually wanted to go into the Secret Service, and I remember going to an interview in the federal building in Columbus, in a 3-piece suit, and having a 2-hour interview with a guy that I found out later my dad knew. The answer was going to be no from the get-go. I mean, I was pouring sweat. I mean, it was the federal building. There was no air conditioning at the time, and I was like, man, I think this is great. I'm interviewing with the special agent in charge of the Secret Service in Columbus, Ohio. And the guy was just like going through the motions because my dad asked him to. So.
Wow. Your dad definitely garnered a lot of respect from a lot of people in that standpoint. And again, it's nice to hear that you don't regret that decision that you did. It goes to how you were raised, which is a very good thing to do that. I just, when you were mentioning that, and I've tried to think about times as my kids have challenged me on some things that I've had to alter my views sometimes, and I'm glad that I did on these occasions. But yeah, it was very, very powerful statement that you just said there, backing up that you wouldn't change it. But I think it also added some other flavor to your life. So there's, as you said, and I think you've written this, you take something from everything that you've done to sort of come up with these dots, right? So you're making this soup, so to speak.
Yeah, I had you do. And I think my parents, if nothing else, taught us the value of family. And I remember when my dad was sick and he was dying, and I had my own job, but I was still living at home. And my youngest brother was in high school, and he had a basketball game one night. And I said to my dad, it's been a couple of days since I worked out. I'm not gonna go to my brother's game. I'm gonna go work out. My dad just looked at me and he's like, "No, you're not." I'm like, wait a minute. I'm an adult. I've got my own job. I don't need this. I'm going to work out. No, you're not. And it was basically what we were about, was caring about each other, loving each other and supporting each other. So obviously I didn't go work out. I went to my brother's game because that was what we were about as a family. And that's what my mom and dad taught us. They constantly did the divide and conquer parenting thing. Okay, this kid's got a game over here at this time, and this kid's got to practice at that time. You go here, I'll go there,
Yeah, but it was a family unit, and there's not enough of that anymore. So that was a good. So how is it? And I notice there's a lot of top tier coach. You're coaching women, girls. How is that different? I mean, from a male standpoint, there's some really good coaches and stuff. How is, because there's times when I talk with women about speaking and storytelling and stuff like that, and sort of careers, and it gets up to a point where I know I don't have the expertise because I haven't walked in their shoes to do that. So how do you? I guess basketball is basketball at a certain time, but how do you do that? How's that different?
I think boys, there's that competitive juices. Not that there's not in girls, but I think it's more pronounced in guys.
Competitive juices. I have 2 daughters. I know that for sure. There's competitive juices.
But with girls, it's about the relationships they build as part of a team. And I remember one day I was coach. I was right in the middle of a game, and I turned to the bench and I pointed at a girl and I'm like, "Go in for so and so." And she nods her head, and I turn around and I'm watching the game, and I look over at the scores table. There's There's nobody there. So I turned back around to her and I pointed again. I'm like, get in the game. And all of a sudden she's like a major league, pitcher shaking me off. Like, no. I'm like, what? I'm like, we're in the middle of a game. I mean, are you serious? Like, so I bring her over to stand next to me and I'm like, what's the problem? I don't want to go in the game. I'm like, wait a minute. There's no uniform wearers on this team. You don't just show up and sit on the bench and wear a uniform. You work hard every day in practice. You deserve to go in the game. All of a sudden, the tears start down her cheeks. And I'm like, what's wrong? She's like, I'm afraid I'm going to make a mistake. I'm like, hey, I got news for you. You're going to make a mistake. I know that. That's not a problem. But people in the stands, my friends, might laugh at me. I'm like, you know what? If they laugh at you, they're not your friends. And number two, what about your friends on the bench? What about these women on this bench that you work with every day? Don't you owe them something? And I'm like, I'm having a counseling session right in the middle of a game. I'm like, I have never had that in my life. And I'd coached boys before, but it was just like, would you please go in the game? Okay. And she's drying her eyes and off she went into the game. But girls play for a different reason than boys do. And that's the camaraderie and being part of the group. Whereas boys, that's not nearly as important as winning and getting out there and competing. For at least for my girls, it wasn't so much about – I mean, I took every loss so much harder than they did. They get back on the bus after a loss. We're having a good time. What's on TV tonight? What are we eating for – I'm like, are you kidding me? We just lost.
Yeah, but I still got my friends, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting because my daughters didn't do unfortunately didn't do sports. Well, unfortunately didn't do a lot of sports and stuff. But I watching them grow up and being involved in their life. I didn't have any sons. I grew up with people who had brothers and stuff, and brothers are it's pretty easy. Somebody beats the crap out of somebody, the pecking order's been reestablished, and you go on with life.
Yes.
Where I mentioned the competitive, they play for keeps. There's a psychological warfare that goes on between sisters that I just it was very strange for me. But they're both great kids, and I can't say enough about them, good things about them. So now you've Citadel's a military academy, is it not?
It is.
Okay, all right. And so the discipline and stuff, that was probably much like what you had in your dad's living with your dad. It may have been easier than living with your dad, it sounds like.
Well, it wasn't, believe me. It was, I mean, I had been fortunate enough to have Coach K, Mike Krzyzewski, who's at Duke now, come and recruit me when he was at Army, when he was at West Point. And I'd had 3 knee surgeries in high school, and I was like, I just don't know if I can make the commitment at West Point. Whereas the Citadel, yes, it was military, but there was not the commitment afterwards. You did not have to go into the military. But it was still Division I, basketball. I got to play against, Michael Jordan and, a lot of people that ended up in the NBA while I was at the Citadel. And my coach, Les Robinson, as far as I know, I think he's still the only person that was a Division I college basketball coach at 3 different schools, and also a Division I athletic director at 3 different schools. So just a super guy that really, I love playing for him, and he cared about you, not just as a basketball player, but as a person as well. So, yeah, it was great. But when I went there, it was all military, and hazing was something that they did.
It was hazing. It's not acceptable today, but that was just sort of what you did back in those days. And it's unfortunate some people take those things to extreme. A lot of it's good-natured stuff. It's not anything, I did fraternity and we had some hazing and initiation stuff that went on. It was looking back, it was what boys did.
Right.
That was like in the locker room or something. And not
exactly.
That's what we did. And I think at the end of the day, it made us all sort of more adaptable and stronger, because that's just simply what happened with that. So now what are you doing now? I mean, so now we come back and how your business today, what's that look like? I'm sure you don't have any drills, or hopefully your knees don't come into play on that from the day.
No. I mean, really, since the pandemic, I've had a very limited opportunity to speak, certainly to groups and things like that. So I've been doing quite a few podcasts and things like that. I wrote a book last year, but really right now I'm dealing with this rare form of cancer that started back in 2012 that has led to my foot amputation, my leg amputation last year. And I've got tumors in my lungs that I'm treated for every 3 weeks. So that, I guess I'm just trying to stay alive at this point.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you sound like you've adapted very well, and you appreciate every day that you are here, and are definitely taking the advice that my dad gave me is, you need to live this life. You get one chance to go around, and we don't know how long we get to do it. My wife and I just got diagnosed with COVID here this last week, and we took the antibodies and things like that, and we're doing better.
Good.
From that standpoint, but you just don't know. I mean, we've made it this long, and then who knows where we got it? We blame each other.
Right.
Who gave it to who? But this isolation, this stuff that we're living in now, is just sort of weird. And I think that we all need to remember that every day is a gift, and it's how you touch other people. If you make it my personal goal is to, every time I meet, if I do a podcast and it helps one person, then I've accomplished my goal. One person. And it sounds like you've got very much the same mindset, and what you're trying to do from that motivational check is to keep us all sort of sane in this insane the world that doesn't seem to make sense anymore.
Yeah, when I found out I was going to have my leg amputated and I had these tumors in my lungs, I went with my wife to the mortuary, to the cemetery, to the church, and I planned my funeral. And a lot of what I speak about is motivation and continuing to move forward and all that. And when I planned my funeral, I got some brushback from people that were like, don't you think that's kind of defeatist? And I was looking at them like, well, last time I checked, I think we're all going to die. I don't think anybody's working on a cure for life right now. So, everybody dies, but not everybody really lives. And I remember a Native American Blackfoot proverb that I heard years ago that goes like this: when you were born, you cried and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's what I want. And I think the important words in that saying are live your life. Get out there, find the reason you were put on the face of this earth, and live that reason. And when you do, death is not nearly as scary as opposed to all those people that, kind of live a casual life. And as a result, their dreams, their goals, their ambitions become a casualty of kind of that unplanned living.
Yeah. And I think as I said, my dad, I learned that we all die at some point in time anyways. And I think the point that where you went out and planned it, that removes that task from those that you leave behind, for one thing, and you get to do it the way that you want it. And you can truly say, yeah, that's the way Terry wanted to go out. It's a Mexican hat dance or whatever. So
yeah, exactly.
But it's the way that you had it, and you relieve others of that responsibility so that they can then rejoice, that you lived a full life.
Yeah. I mean, you've experienced, with your father dying at a young age. I mean, when my dad died, in his early 50s, it was like, okay, you're exhausted mentally, physically, emotionally, and now the person just died. Now we've got to go plan the funeral. Now we've got to do all this other kind of stuff, and you're just kind of on autopilot. And I was like, no, I'd like to give this gift to my family that, when I die, you make one phone call, it's all taken care of, and you can just be with each other and grieve however you want to grieve.
Yeah, well, I kid with my family is I want to have that song by King Julius. I want to move it done at my funeral.
Well, I always tell I want to be buried. My wife wants to be cremated, and so we settled on a crypt, kind of a mausoleum, and so I said, well, when they put me in the wall there, I want Pink Floyd's Another Brick in the Wall playing, when they do that. So I'm right there with you on songs.
We had a columbarium that my wife and I got, so we have it's a 2-room apartment.
There you go.
That they can put our ashes in to go. And it was funny when I was thinking about this is that we picked when we're looking at it, I picked the lower left corner. I mean, it's a very much lower left corner. And I joked because it's my last ditch effort to irritate my liberal friends for eternity. So anyway, even in that, I want to have a little humor.
Absolutely, might as well, right? Your last thing.
So, well, how do people get a hold of you today? I mean, you'd be a great, again, you come across very well with video and stuff and motivational stuff on that. So definitely, how do people get a hold of you, work with you, do those other things? And because I think everybody could benefit, as I drool on myself, telling this story.
Well, that's COVID. We'll let you go on this one. So, yeah, I talked about Motivational Check. That's my blog. I put up a thought for the day every day, usually with a question to kind of see how maybe that thought could be used in your life. On Mondays, I put up the Monday morning motivational message, which is usually a video or a story that's a little bit longer. But if you need a quick hit of inspiration or motivation, go to motivationalcheck.com. You can get access to my book. You can get access to my social media sites. You can leave me a message there if you'd like. So motivationalcheck.com will get you to me.
Cool. Well, I appreciate that, Terry. And just a sort of review, if you go back and look over the hero's journey here, it doesn't matter where the dots are. You're the author there. You connect your own journey to go on and do that. And you're a perfect example of taking sort of the unexpected journey through life. But I think in each of those things, again, you took something away that you use later in life that helped you. And it's all part of Terry. It's all part of who Terry is. And, your family and your children are all, well, besides being giants, are all, are all great people. And we need, and you're giant both in spirit and in stature. So for that, I really appreciate you shining that and helping. You helped me today. So I think as we go along the journey, then you've made the world a little bit better place. And I want to thank you for that.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be on your show. I mean, like I've always said, it's good people like you that allow me to come on and tell my story. And hopefully between our conversation, as you said, we make a difference in the life of somebody out there. And if we do that, for me, today's been a good day.
Outstanding. Well, Terry, thanks. Merry Christmas, because we're recording this a bit early. And go and reach out to Terry. You won't regret it. Bye.
I hope not. Thanks a lot, Doug.